Hi, everyone. My name is Sean. On Reddit, I use a handle that I don't even really know how to pronounce. It's can't use or cantus, take your pick. Today, I wanted to make a video. It's not my first, but it's my first in hopefully a series of kind of casual videos where I explore some Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire topics and hopefully make you guys have some reflection, maybe some new ideas about what's going on in the story. Why am I doing this? Mostly because I've got a couple of really big essays that I've been stuck on for a long time, and they have some great ideas. I'm not quite sure about some of the conclusion and some of the further out ideas, and so I figured I'd do this video as a way of talking about things without having to try and finish off this like 20,000 word essay that I've got going. Anyways, so what in particular is this video about? This video is about Mance Rayder and his true mission. So in particular, there's some things that I think people overlooked when they read A Dance with Dragons about what's going on with Mance Rayder, what's he doing, etc. I believe that this is the kind of detail that when later books, should they come out, will make you kind of go, oh yeah, that was obvious. Why didn't I see that coming? In the same way that when you finish A Clash of Kings the first time, especially if you read it before you saw the show, you're like, what the hell just happened at Winterfell? And then later you put it all together, oh yeah, it got sacked, Ramsay Bolton, I get it now. Because I'll admit, the first time I read A Clash of Kings, I was a bit confused by that part. But in hindsight, it seems totally obvious. And I hope that what I'm about to tell you about Mance Rayder has that same effect. So what in particular am I talking about when I say his true mission? Well, it all hinges on Melisandre's point of view chapter. In her point of view chapter in A Dance with Dragons, she has sort of a private conversation with Mance. And for now, I'm going to refer to him as Rattle Mance, referring to the fact that he's currently glamored as Rattleshirt. And in that chapter, in that point of view, Melisandre is talking to him about their goals. And there's a few key phrases that I think are easy to dismiss, are easy to kind of glide over when you're reading, but if you pay attention to them and you apply a little bit of elbow logic to them, you can figure out what she probably really means. And so let me just grab my Kindle and share them with you. So let's see, it is, oh yeah, so here's the first paragraph I want to read. It says, the wildling's own eyes narrowed, gray eyes, brown eyes. Melisandre could see the color change with each pulse of the ruby. Cutting out the eyes, that's the weeper's work. The best crow's a blind crow, he likes to say. Sometimes I think he'd like to cut out his own eyes, the way they're always watering and itching. Snow's been assuming the free folk would turn to Tormund to lead them, because that's what he would do. He liked Tormund, and the old fraud liked him too. If it's the weeper, though, that's not good. Not for him, and not for us. The reason that's interesting is because of the use of the word us. It obviously implies some sort of group. And the implicit understanding here is that us would at least include Melisandre and Rattle Mance, that they are in collusion on something. But why would it matter whether or not it's Tormund or the Weeper that is out there? We'll get to that. The other part is, let's see if I can find it. Okay, so there's a couple of parts, but fundamentally, it's Rattle Mance says, no one ever trusted Rattleshirt but fools, Snow's not that. If his sister needs saving, he'll send his crows, I would. Now, so they debate these things about trust, but here is the key line. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Why is it being so difficult for me to find this line? It's really not that hard. Oh, it's the line right before that. My apologies. This is what Melisandre says right before Rattleshirt says his line about not trusting Rattleshirt. She says, "The girl," she said, "a girl in gray on a dying horse, Jon Snow's sister. Who else could it be? She was racing to him for protection." That much Melisandre had seen clearly. There's an implication for which that thought right there, but I'll come back to it. "I have seen her in my flames, but only once. We must win the Lord Commander's trust, and the only way to do that is to save her." So that's the important line. And you might think, well, what's the importance of that? Well, the importance is she says that they need to win Jon's trust, and the only way to do that is to save Arya. If you think about it, you probably didn't really think much of that line at the time because the book's huge. You got a lot of stuff going on, especially your first read through. You're trying to race through everything to get to the end and find out all the big plot points, all the big twists. In the same way that a reread of any of the books will often show you things that you missed the first time, I think this is one of them. And why? Because she's saying they have to rescue Arya first, and then they get Jon's trust. Doesn't that seem a little backwards to you? Wouldn't you think that in reality what's really happening, or what you'd expect, is that they have to get Jon's trust before he can send Rattlemance on a mission to go rescue Arya? I mean, that seems logical, right? So it seems a bit confused at first. You could either assume that maybe this is a part where the character misspeaks for whatever reason, but it's deliberate, or that it's a error in the writing on Martin's case. But let's, in my opinion, assume that neither of those are the case, because despite the fact that Martin is writing huge books and has made mistakes before, they're very rare, and I don't think that this is necessarily one of them. And also, Melisandre, we're in her point of view. There's no indication of deception on her part. And granted, the books are full of characters that, for whatever reason, don't share their real secrets with the readers, for whatever reason, like Eddard and his thoughts about Jon's parents. You know, that part is never mentioned, despite the fact that we're in his point of view. So why would it be important to get Jon's trust after rescuing Arya? So this, I think, is actually fairly straightforward to explain, and let me try to use my handy visual to explain it. So if I take this, I'm going to say this big old X right here, right there, is Castle Black, motherfucker. And we know that, according to Melisandre, they need to rescue Arya, and only then will they have Jon's trust. Trust for what? Basically, my argument is that they want Jon's trust to go do something else after they've rescued Arya. So they're going to send Mance on his mission to Winterfell, right? They said, well, to Long Lake or wherever, based off of your understanding of that point of view chapter. But the point is they're like, hey, we're going to go off, rescue, we'll come back, and guess what? Then we've got your trust. That doesn't make much sense to me, and I hope it doesn't make much sense to you, because if this is some secret fucking mission, and Jon lets Mance go anywhere, whether it's to Long Lake or to Winterfell or who cares, why would they need Jon's trust for anything else? Let's say that Mance had some other thing he had to go do. He could just he could do the rescue, but he could also just fuck off and go, woo, do whatever, right? He doesn't need Jon's trust. The only time he would need Jon's trust is if he came back and he had some other operation to do that required like a different level of security clearance. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's something that where Jon trust him here, trust him to do this, but it would be an entirely different operation and consideration to give Rattlemance permission to do whatever that secret mission was. Now, you might think, okay, I'm on board with it, but that seems a bit hard at this point to like figure out what he could do. Well, I've got news for you. There's actually, I think, a way to solve this and figure out what the fuck it actually was. Like I just said, if it was a secret mission they would just go do it if they could, right? They'd just, woo, fuck off and do it. I mean, he kind of does when he rescues Arya at Winterfell. So here's my point. It has to be something that he couldn't fuck off and do once he gets when he gets released to go do the rescue. And the only, in my opinion, reasonable explanation, and especially one where they need Jon's trust to do it, is because of the wall. Now, what I mean by that is that, let's say his secret mission was actually up here somewhere, north of the wall. That makes sense, right? If it was north of the wall, he'd come back after having rescued Arya and he'd be like, hey, I want to go north of the wall. You can see why that would be a separate trust issue, especially if Jon doesn't know the truth about Rattlemance. If he thinks it's just Rattleshirt still, he would have serious issues with it. And he actually makes that explicit in the books. Let me just take a moment and show you where. It's in Jon's 4th chapter. Let's see if I can guess. Yeah, here we go. So if we go to... Yeah, it's when Stannis gives Rattleshirt to Jon, and Jon has his first reaction. It says, Jon was aghast. Your Grace, this man cannot be trusted. If I keep him here, someone will slit his throat for him. If I send him ranging, he'll just go back over to the wildlings. He literally just says he cannot be trusted, which is the exact same vocabulary that Melisandre uses when talking about winning his trust. So in other words, it only makes sense if between the logistics of him having to get trust again because he's going to a different part of the world that Jon controls, and needing Jon's trust so that he knows he won't just go back over to the wildlings, then it makes sense that it's really because they need his trust so that they can send Mance up here. But why would they send Mance north of the wall, especially as Rattlemance? Why would it be so important? Well, I believe that can also be explained by the logistics and the timing of things. Notice when Rattleshirt is given to Jon. It's in Jon's 4th chapter when Stannis announces that he cannot sit around and wait for his enemies and that he has to move. That's when Mance is left behind. In other words, I believe that Mance was always going to be used to try and do something north of the wall, but it depended on when the enemies approached. In other words, my hypothesis, and what I think is actually the case, is that Mance was going to act as the liaison between Tormund and Stannis, help broker an agreement, an alliance. I think that's pretty straightforward. And as a matter of fact, if you go back to that line that I shared earlier, where Mance says, oh, if it's the Weeper, that's not good for us at all. AKA, and he says that there's like this clear preference for Tormund. So in other words, I believe Mance's real mission was always to get Jon's trust by doing this rescue, then go north of the wall and meet Tormund. Now, I think that's pretty straightforward. There are, however, some really interesting implications of it, if you think about it. Implication number one, he obviously never does it, right? He ends up rescuing Arya, gets stuck, we don't know what happened to him, maybe he's dead. However, it's clear that Val is the one that ends up going and finding Tormund and appearing to broker an alliance. What makes this interesting is that, remember when Stannis was talking with Jon and they agreed to leave the wildling vanguard with Jon in exchange for those mountain men, that's when Stannis suddenly wants an extra promise from Jon. He says, promise to me that you will keep our princess close. You're not going to let her go. And Jon's like, yeah, sure. My point is, Melisandre was at that meeting. She was privy to that agreement. And also, Melisandre lives in the King's Tower while at Castle Black. And Val is a prisoner in that same tower. My point being, Melisandre would know absolutely when Val was let go to go on her mission to go find Tormund. And yet there is nary a single peep or complaint or protest from Melisandre at all regarding Val's departure from the castle. So, but she knew about the promise. So in other words, I believe Melisandre knew that this was happening, and she allowed it to happen because of that mission to always find Tormund and make some sort of alliance with him. I guess the follow-up question you have to wonder is, why was this all in secret? Why did it have to be a secret? In my opinion, there's a couple of reasons for the secrecy. Some are large scale, and I don't know, it would kind of tip my hand and probably bias people for or against my later videos, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But I will say that I believe it was secret because Stannis, Melisandre, and other people at Castle Black who were more or less on Stannis' side didn't trust people with that knowledge. I believe that you can see that everywhere. In particular, it's when Jon executes Janos Slynt. This is when Janos is about to get executed. He's shouting out protests. He's acting like he's tough. And one of the things he says is, "Oh, I've got powerful friends. You'll see. You can't do this to me. I'm untouchable." Well, while he's saying all that shit, Stannis is literally on the steps of the King's Tower, listening to all of this. So, in other words, I believe that this is one of those moments where Stannis realizes he really can't trust people. And that's not the only moment. There's also, it's obvious that Stannis doesn't trust people at Castle Black with the truth of what he's doing a number of times. Whether it's the Wrong Way Rangers, Justin Massey and Richard Horpe, on their way down to see Mors Umber, where nobody knows what their real mission was. So it makes sense that this is secret. Why? We'll get to that later. But I believe that I've done a good enough job establishing why Mance had this mission, or that this was his mission, really, was to some sort of secret alliance with Tormund. I believe that even though this is a small detail, it ties into other details that I hope start to paint a larger picture of what people might be doing. And anyways, I'm going to clean this up, think about what I want to do next, and hopefully I can put a couple of these out in a short period of time. Keep some momentum. Thank you very much.